So if you wouldn't mind joining with us.
Hey, they're not going back to their tables. What do we do now?
Just start playing. Just play through one time. Just play through once. That's a good idea.
That's a good idea.
Okay, play through.
We're ready.
Behold our God.
all the guilt of sinful man. God eternal, humble to the grave. Jesus, Savior, raising down to reign. Our God, seated on His throne, come let us adore Him. Behold our King, nothing can compare. Come let us adore Him. You will reign forever. Let your glory fill the earth. You will reign forever. Let your glory fill the earth. You will reign forever. Let your glory fill the earth. You will reign forever. Behold our King, nothing can compare. Come let us adore. Behold our God, seated on His throne. Come let us adore Him. Behold our King, nothing can compare. Come let us adore Him. All right, you may be seated.
but he's going to talk about it. They're going to interact with each other. And the last one is, the last one is, I have to see it here. Come on back. There we go. The associate pastor, generally in this construct, he will offer a resignation. Really, this is done. He will offer his resignation to the new senior pastor coming in. The new senior pastor coming in will not accept the resignation, but put it in a drawer in case he needs it. I'm serious. That is pretty much the way it works. If a new senior pastor comes in, he's not going to be crazy to just tell the guy to go. He's going to work with him, see if things go well, and that's good. He'll be there. If they don't feel like they're connecting, then he does have the person's resignation, and he can accept at that particular point in time. That's the way this particular model would function. Now remember, there's crossovers, but that's pretty much the way I functioned for many years, about the first 14 years that I was at the church in Lakeland, maybe even a little more. I was the senior pastor at that point in time. But you know, I began to realize that there is a better way, I felt, or that God was showing me a better way, and it's what we've called the pastoral team leader model. And I said, it's not chairman of the board. In this case, you're an African tribal chief. How about it, chief? Now, seriously, when I was making some trips overseas, went to Ghana, and we were in a village, and I was observing how the African chief functioned. And I thought, that's it. That's really what I think we do. Here's the African chief. They have all these issues going on in the village. He calls all the other ones, the elders in the village. He calls them together. He listens to them. He interacts with them. He considers all this being said. And then he speaks as the chief. After he's assimilated it all and says, so here's what we will do. That's what I'm thinking in terms of a pastoral team leader. So notice how it goes down through here with this. The associate pastor, there's mutual respect and love. The buck still stops with, what's it say up there? It stops with us. It doesn't stop with me. Because who's the real leader of the church? Who is it? Christ. When you see the book back there that I brought for you that talks about the pastoral senior pastor, Jesus is the real pastor of our church. And we're to take our lead from him. He's the one guiding us. And there ought to be, among our pastoral team, an understanding of what Jesus wants us to do. And if we can't discern that together as we walk in the Spirit, then we better stop and wait and listen a little more before the decision is made. When it comes to leading, he's the first among equals. He's not the boss, he's a colleague. He sees himself as that. Involvement with the deacons is, you'll notice here, they're around the table with them, but they're circles now, and they're respected and honored by the other men that are on the deacon board. When it comes to accountability, look what happens here. There's mutual accountability all the way around. I, as a pastoral team leader, am responsible to the other pastors. They need to hold me accountable. They need to speak to me where they see the strengths and the weaknesses. And I need as well to work with them. I'm just leading the team. When it comes to functions, this one was a little rough for me in the sense that I'd functioned in all these other realms, but when it came to, for example, weddings, I remember sitting at a table, and I says, by the way, I heard that Joe and Josie are getting married. Anybody know about that? And I remember Pastor Scott saying, yeah, I've got that wedding. And I'm thinking, yeah? I wasn't even invited. What? I'm the pastor. Oh, no, wait, I'm not the pastor. Okay, yeah, that was a big one. That really kind of shook me a little bit to realize, wait a minute. So they announced just a general wedding, announcement for the whole congregation. And now I'm just one of the whole congregation. Yikes. Well, it's just the way it goes. I remember going to the hospital to visit one of our dear saints that was in intensive care. And, they only let, the pastor in there. And I get there, and I said, I'm going in. I'm Pastor Don. I'm his pastor. And he said, no, pastor's already been here. They, what? Well, in this case, it was one of our growth group shepherds. He was the pastor that came to see his person. And I couldn't get in. Okay, this is a whole new idea, right? I mean, it was a major learning curve for me, who likes to take charge. And, it really was. So other people, what about baptism? Now here, this is another one of those little stretch things, but what about baptism? Who does the baptizing? Who? Pardon me? The person that's requested. Well, that might be close. The discipler is the one that does the baptizing, not even the pastoral team. Isn't that what it says in Matthew 28, 19 and 20? Go make disciples and baptize them. You're not obeying Jesus when you're being baptized. You're obeying Jesus when you do baptizing. Chew on that one. I mean, seriously. There's a huge difference on who does. How many of you ladies have baptized someone yet? What? You never discipled anybody? No. It took us 17 years to get to the point where we could have a woman baptize somebody in our church. And we did have a pastor in the tank with her too. But I mean, seriously. But look at that text again. Matthew 28, 19 and 20. It says, basically, the discipler is to be the baptizer. Okay, now we'll quit meddling a little. Let's go on here. I lose all the credibility on that one. Pastoral team leader, is his job to make the team look good, and he's reproduced, this group reproduces reproducers. They've adopted that mindset as a pastoral team leader. When it comes to job description, again, he makes the team look good. The pastor team leader, it's his job to facilitate and make sure the other pastors have the freedom to do what God has called them to do. He helps them look good. He helps think team. I remember in the church that I'm a member at, we had shared this with them earlier, these concepts, and a couple years later, they were looking for their fourth pastor. And you know what they did that day? They went in there and they put all the responsibilities of the present pastors on the board. Then they put the new pastor's name up, and they said, okay, how do we shuffle the deck? And they began to look at different roles that some of them were doing, but this guy was better at. And so they just shifted around. They think team. How are we more effective as a team? If you ever played any team sport, you know that coach is going to help shift them around to where they have their greatest strengths. And we don't always serve in our greatest area of strength. So we think team. This one was never adopted at the church before I left. Need and productivity rather than position and education, really. Longevity. What is the need of the individuals? That's what it actually says in 1 Timothy. Those that serve well, those that preach the word, deserve a double portion it talks about. But ultimately it says don't muzzle the ox. Make sure you deal with them so you've got productivity on one hand. Not longevity, not education, but need. And our deacons, man, the ones that the trustees that were responsible for finances, I would say, look, Pastor Warren's going to need to make more money than me. His kids are about ready to go to college. I don't need that much money. So pay him. Oh no, Pastor. No, some of them are still, you're the chairman of the board. And I'll tell you, it was really rough. When I did leave and one of the associate pastors took over, the beginning of the end of his ministry there, because he only lasted a couple of years, was when the trustees decided to give him a $10,000 raise. And you know why they gave him a $10,000 raise? Because he's now the senior pastor in some of their thinking. He had to make more than any of the other pastors. And one of the other pastors certainly needed, but no, it had to go to him. We need to think through, what does the Bible really say about these things? And so, think in terms of that. And then when it came to this, decision making, it was by consensus. We interacted with each other. We come to a consensus like that African tribal chief, and then we would move. When we had the mind of Christ in consensus. And then the last one has to do with the pastoral search, and that the associate pastors on this team are the ones that are driving the pastoral search, because they are looking, along with some of the congregation, they are looking for someone to come in and lead their team. But that's not the normal concept here. That's not the normal concept that I see in the churches that I've gone to. Basically, you don't involve any of the pastors or any of the associates in the search. That would be terrible. In fact, we had people call that were looking to be considered, and they'd call, and when one of the associates would answer the phone and they'd ask, they'd like to talk to somebody on the pulpit committee, he says, "Oh, I'm on the pulpit committee," they'd hang up. I'm not going to come to a church where the pastor's on the pulpit committee. I'm not sure how to impress upon you that maybe we need to change the way we think about our roles. And where do you see yourself as your pastors? Where are you in this continuum? I didn't mean you're absolutely number one, the first one or the second one or the third one, but where do you see yourself in this continuum? And I'll suggest to you that the closer you move toward a pastoral team leader continuum, I think the closer you will be to what I think the scriptures would have us, how they would have us serve as pastors. You certainly have every right to disagree with that. And there's a question and answer time later. And I think Joel will answer those questions. Okay, let's go to the next slide, or the next PowerPoint. Now, what we're going to see next is a cross, and then we're going to look at what I call cells. So here we are, cell concepts. Now, I think you'll be able to capture this, but these are the four, if I would make them as pure as possible, these are the four different churches that I pastored in that same church. And so we're going to look at what I've dubbed as the single cell, stretch cell, multiple cell, and metacell ministries. That's how I've just dubbed them that so that we could have conversation. Single cell. Here we go. Single cell is generally will have a congregation size of about 125 or less. And they function in this way. Generally, it's led by one pastor, a solo pastor. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? They usually, if they're 125 or less, they can't afford two. But then again, they don't think of someone as an unpaid pastor either. But generally, the single cell will have one pastor. The major emphasis in this will be a family spirit. The church is going to be one great big happy family. Every Sunday, when the deacon or one of the musicians gets up to lead the church at Grace, he say, "Welcome, family." They would pride themselves in being one big happy family. Congregational rule is what is practiced, where the entire membership is being involved in the decision-making process of the church. As I talked about it, they will discuss it, they will argue it, but they will be involved in it. They practice congregational rule here. In this one, there's an extensive expectations for the pastor. You got that right? In this one, extensive. What does the pastor do? Remember, it's really the pastor model that we're talking about here. So it's the pastor's job to do the visitation. It's the pastor's job to visit every family every year. That's not uncommon in this model. You do all the hospital calls. You're there for baby dedications. You're there for babies' births. You are there for, I was there for the baby. I married some of the kids that I visited when they were born. That's really kind of cool, actually. But that's the expectation. Graduation, you're going to the graduation party. It's just your job to do all that. Oh, don't forget the counseling. And somewhere in between there, make sure you study for the message, right? It's 1 year. In the first year, I sat down to write a resignation. I was ready to throw it in. Of all the expectations that I had of myself. It was the congregation, true, but those were the expectations I had of me. I am supposed to do all of that. I'm the pastor. That's a single cell mindset. And then there's one more. There's an emphasis placed on being a full service church. Now, I don't know what that means to you, but I know what it meant to me. It meant that we had to have Sunday school. It meant that we had to have morning church. It meant that we had to have something like youth group before evening church. We had to have evening church. We had to have prayer meeting. We had to have youth group. That was all of that had to be there. It's not a church if it doesn't have a choir. Did you know that back in those days? I guess it's not a church now, maybe, if you don't have a worship band. But in any case, all of those things existed and had to exist in my mind and in the mind of the congregation. That's a single-cell church. We're going to come back, I think, to the ramifications of that if we have time. And I have ramifications of each one of these. Then there's the stretch cell. The stretch cell basically is this. You can increase about 100 people for every staff person. And it's called Staffing for Growth. And there's books that I read about that. So finally I figured out we got to get an assistant or we got to get an associate. But mostly it was, in this case, it's an assistant. I need to get somebody to help me. I can't do it all on my own. So I need somebody to work with the youth, or I need someone to do evangelism. So our first hire was evangelists, someone that would minister in the area of evangelism. And he did a great job in that. On any given Thursday night, we'd have 50 people out doing EE, if you know what that is. That would be typical. Be out there doing that. And so I needed help. So here's I added additional staff. It provided in the area of specialty areas. And that's significant. I was looking for a producer. There's increased attention given to maintaining a family spirit. You know why that is, don't you? Because once you get past a certain size, you're going to start to lose some of that family spirit that you felt when you were small. In fact, Elmer Towns said that we can only know about 40 to 50 people. Once you get to that level of 40 to 50 people, you start losing. So you got to work at keeping and maintaining that family spirit. If you've ever gone to a family reunion that has more than 50 or 60 people, it's like, nah. There's about 200 in our family. My uncles and aunts, 9 on each side, and they were very encouraging kids to have more kids. The pastor is still expected to do all the pastoral functions in this one. Still have to do it all. You're stretched, you've got the assistant, but you're still doing the weddings, you're still doing the baptisms, you're still doing all the rest of the stuff. It's just you got somebody helping in a couple other areas. Which really, in some ways, though he's helping in other areas, if you're adding people because of that, you've got more responsibility as the pastor. Then we have this. The congregation rule as described under this is still the same. They still practice congregational rule. And you can probably figure out the ramifications, but we'll talk about them later. More people available to do the work, but with a sense of a loss of control. The more people are there, the more people's opinions, the more people that are going on, and the more that you don't know what's happening. What's happening. So that's stretch cell. Then we have what I've called the multiple cell. Multiple cell, and this one is that you have a true pastoral team. You're reproducing producers in this one. You're going to see that some of these are very close to kin, but this is there's been a change from producer to reproducing producers. In this one, if I can get it up there, there's more lay involvement, and there's an emphasis on the priesthood of individuals. The members are the ministers when you get to the multiple cell model. And that's 250 people and more. The people just have to become involved in ministry. When it comes to congregational polity, it's congregational government. It's practiced with the deacons being made, pastoral team, assisted by the deacons, and then affirmed by the congregation. That progression is important in the multiple cell. And then when it comes to unity, it exists this because we're starting to cooperate with each other. Who's going to have the church van this week? Who's going to take care of this? Who's going to deal with the music this week? And what are we singing? Here's what the message is. You're cooperating with each other in that ministry. And let's see, the last one, and this is why it's called multiple cell, is you actually have small groups in this ministry. When you move into a multiple cell ministry, you get beyond 250 people, you're going to find that the only way you're going to maintain the family spirit is to be breaking them down into small groups where they have that spirit taking place there. And so there's intimacy being maintained at that level. And then there's this one, the metacell. Now this one, saying strange, you can have a metacell mindset ministry with 16 people or 16,000 people or 750,000 people, because there are churches that are that large in other countries, Korea specifically. How do they think about ministry? Well, let's live where we live. Let's go to the 16 or the 25 or the 40 or the church I'm at right now that realistically I guess we'd be averaging about 80. How am I supposed to think? And here's this. It's the true pastoral team again, but we think in terms of reproducing reproducers. We work hard at that. Just for a side note, what do I do when I go into a church and they have what I told you, and they have one pastor and I'm it? What do you do about that? Do I really believe in a metacell ministry? And I refuse to function as the pastor. I will go in there, and within a short time, I'll be able to identify individuals in that church that I can bring alongside of me and have them function with me as an unpaid pastor, and I will not allow myself to become a dictatorial, this is what we're going to do kind of thing. I won't function that way. I'll make sure there's someone there that joins me so I'm not an independent agent. I think you can do that if you have that a mindset that's saying, look, I don't believe in one pastor of a local church. I don't. And then we have this one. Lay involvement is still the same with this one. The believers, we're equipping them to do the ministry. When it comes to congregation, we believe in congregational government. You see, it's pretty much the same. When it comes to emphasis on this, there's collaboration. Collaboration. In other words, we're not just cooperating with each other, but we're really working together to make it happen. There is a collaboration of how we can accomplish this. Well, let's take one area, for example, preaching. How many of you collaborate in your preaching? I mean, actually have somebody or buddies that you actually collaborate with before you preach a message. And my guess is very few. I don't expect you really to raise your hands, but I'll tell you what makes a world of difference. We had over 100 individuals go out in the full-time vocational ministry. One of the things that we did is every Tuesday, 5 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday morning, there would be anywhere from 5 to 10 individuals that would come and had prepared to talk with me about the message I'm going to preach that next weekend. And we collaborated together. We talked. 2 women, generally there were 2 women, and then various other individuals. So we would sit there. They will have studied. They will have done word studies. They will have looked at the Greek. They would have interacted with all that. So that when they came in, they bring their notes. We talk about it. We practice illustrations. I'd ask, do they get this? Do they get that? Will this be clear? Do you have any suggestions? They'd leave their notes, and then I'd use that later in that week to finalize and prepare the message. That's collaboration. Then that's on that side. Then we flip it to the other side, and in our small groups, we had sermon-based application studies. So what we would do is we would restudy the message and how to apply it. And if they didn't get it, meaning if I got feedback from each one of the shepherds, hey, you know what, Pastor Don, they didn't get what you preached. They missed it totally. What would we do next week? The group would get together, we'd talk about it again, and I'd go at it a second time. And what I found that they didn't. Collaboration. Working together to accomplish the mission of that ministry and discipling. That was part of the discipling process. And many of those actually helped me out by taking over the evening service and preaching at the evening services so that they could prepare to go take a church. You can do this. It's not something that's weird. So often, some of the groups, some people I find, pastors will have a group of people that will talk to them about the message after the message. Help them evaluate how it went. Well, why don't we do it in front end instead of just the back end? And you will love it. I guarantee you guys that are preaching regularly, you will love the interaction of other people bringing insights. Now, this kind of only works in many ways if you're just preaching expository messages moving through, because they know where you're going next. So maybe you don't do expository messages. And I think that's probably because they weren't my students in college. Anyway, numerous single-cell groups. Again, holistic small groups. It's where church, in a sense, takes place. Not here, but out there, as they interact with each other and then as they reach into the communities. And they're the centers of evangelism, centers of care. They're the centers of all of that in a holistic small group setting. Okay, now let's flip the script a little bit and go back and look at some of the ramifications. If you're in a single-cell ministry, if that's the way you've been functioning, then you've got some issues. Meaning, the pastor cannot possibly carry out all the pastoral expectations in a single-cell ministry. You can't do it. It's just too much. And therefore, you're going to burn out, or you're going to have issues there. You just can't do it all. And you're going to disappoint a lot of people over the years. You talk about people coming in the front door and people going out the back door. We've talked about that, why people don't stick, why don't they stay. Well, if you get to one particular size, you can't meet all their needs, and you're functioning as the guy that you're supposed to meet all those needs. It's gonna hurt. Have any of you ever felt burnout? Anybody here? Like you just can't do it? Well, yeah, you can't. Here's one that we really saw. A family dynamic cannot be maintained in groups beyond about 40 to 50. So, yeah, you're just going to start losing some of the family. You just can't accomplish, and you're going to start seeing that dissipate. You're going to find that the greater the lay control, the less likely the church will grow, and the reason is there will not be unity. Somebody loses in congregational rule settings. It just does. You vote on at that same time, you're campaigning, and then you vote, and I'm telling you, you can find yourself being wounded or your spouse being wounded. It can be ugly. We had a missionary. At our church. David went from our church along with Rhonda to Papua New Guinea. They've been over there about a year. They don't speak the language yet. They're working on that. And, they don't have the continual, in those days, that was back in the 90s. And we got a letter from them. And they said, look, we need you to come. Pastor Don, can you and Bonnie come? We did their premarital counseling. We were there when their kids were born. I mean, they were family. We need you to come and help us. So I went, and the team, we talked about it and felt that would be good if we did go. Deacons said, yeah, so we made a motion at a church rule congregational meeting that we would go and to approve the monies to send us. And it opened a firestorm. Why should we send Pastor Don and Bonnie on what's the next word? Vacation. How'd you know that? That was it. Yeah, you must have been there. Honestly, why should we send them on a vacation to Papua New Guinea? I'll tell you what, if you're ever going on vacation, that's not the place. Really, it's not. But in any case, and then it started hot. And then someone raises their hand and said, we just, not only a vacation, but Bonnie's not doing all I think she should do as a pastor's wife. Yeah, that was a good one, And I stopped it right then, as you might think I would. I says, wait a minute. I had not read them the letter or the request. I wanted to protect our missionaries in that respect. But when that happened, I said, okay. And I read the letter where they said they were struggling and that they needed us to come. You know what happened next? Someone immediately raised their hand. I make a motion, they go. It was passed unanimously, and we went. What happened to Bonnie? Ladies, what happened to Bonnie? She struggles. Even though it's behind us by 20 years, it doesn't mean it doesn't every once in a while bring pain to her heart as she thinks about that stab. Congregational rule in this and the next one, people lose. Someone wins, somebody loses, and unity is really hindered in many cases by the concept of congregational rule. And that's what I, of course, say there. In the congregation, someone wins, someone loses. Desire to be a full-service church means that you end up having people serving in areas where they're not at all gifted, but you got to have it happen. I mean, we had an organist. Our choir, Morton's Corners, was a single-cell church. And when it was time for the choir to sing, there were about 50 in that congregation where I grew up, and 11 of them were our family. So when it was time for the choir, the church would sing a hymn. And the people in the congregation that were in the choir would get up and go up into the choir loft. They would sing. The woman playing the piano or organ would wait till we started because she played by ear, and then the organ would come in, and then we'd sing. Um, it wasn't really pretty, very good, but we served in those ways. My Sunday school teacher, Don Slogenhop, our class was in the furnace room, and a bunch of us teen guys, we gave him fits. He was not a good teacher. I mean, he loved us, but not a good teacher. And our youth director was Dorothy Fuller, and we really gave her fits, these bunch of boys. We had a whole group of us. And we were close, but gave her fits. A bunch of us are in ministry today, of course, but they loved us. Now, years later, because I don't want to give you the wrong impression here, I mean, lots happens really good in a single-cell church. And God uses it. But I'm just saying we ought to understand the dynamics of it so that we can maybe move. Well, Dorothy Fuller, she loved it. She was the youth leader. I left, went away to Bible college, went to Langhorne, was there many years, and took our staff up to a PARBC meeting. And I knew I was only about an hour from home in New York. So we drove up. I wanted to show our staff, our pastors, where I grew up and our background. So we drive up to Morton's Corners. Don Slogenhoff's house was right next to the church. He wasn't there. But I said to the guys, I wonder if Dorothy's, Mrs. Fuller, I still call her that, Mrs. Fuller was home. So we drove over to the house. I knock on the door. She had to be in her 70s at the time, and I'm still a young 50. Or younger than 50. She opens the door, and she sees me standing there, and she says, "Donnie, I'm so glad you stopped. I pray for my boys every day." Yeah. Single cell's not a bad cell. It's just there's a lot of ramifications with it. Don Slogenhoff, who couldn't, he couldn't really teach his way out of a paper bag, but he loved us. When my dad died back in 2008, Don drove, he was pretty old at the time, he drove down to the funeral, which was 4 hours away, to be there to support his boys. And I hadn't seen him from the time I'd left till then. Just a little while ago, 3 years ago, I got a call from Don asking if I would come and speak at their 201 anniversary of the church. And so I went, and we had that time with Don. He was 88 at the time, right? And we get home, and in my preaching, I had shared some of the struggles that we have with our grandkids and needs that they have. My granddaughter, for example, is 8 years old, but still has no bowel control, urine control, through a trauma of her mom leaving. And any case, I get a letter in the mail, and it's from Don, and it has a check for $1,000 in it. And he says, "Don, I think you guys must have some financial needs related to your grandkids, and I wanted to help you." Yesterday, I'm sitting in with Joel, and the phone rings. I don't recognize the number, but I pick it up, and it's Don Slogenhoff. It's his 91st birthday, and he wants to know how I'm doing. He's praying for us here today. And then he says, "How's things going with your granddaughter, and do you need any help?" "Well, I just sold our house next to the church, and I think I have I'll pray about what God wants us to do." So if you are in any way thinking that I somehow am being demeaning to a single-cell church, you don't get it at all. God uses each one of us as his church. But I want to think and do better if I can for him. Bring glory to God. So the ramifications there. And by the way, this is the mindset of many of the churches that are planted on the field. And I believe that what has happened is we plant churches that really can't be fully effective because we expect them to act like this. And what has happened, and we did a survey at ABWE, 50% of the churches that were started had closed. And the reason they closed is because they felt the inadequate training of the nationals. And I think we were wrong. And actually, they came to the same conclusion. It wasn't inadequate training of the nationals. It was the model of ministry that we gave them that they can never move beyond. Now, ABWE will send a team out. They'll have a pastoral team model out there with a couple missionaries and one national, and they work together and they're raising up. They're doing a great job. But they changed the way they thought about ministry. Stretch cell, ramifications there. Assistant pastors are added, but the pastor is still expected to do all the expectations of the congregation. There's an effort to maintain a family dynamic, but it results in inward focus. Now mark that down. 7 years. For 7 years, we tracked the attendance. Our attendance was 274, and it declined to 250-something over a 7-year period. That doesn't seem like much decline, does it? But it's not health and growth. And what I realized is we worked really hard, working amazingly hard to try to maintain a family spirit. We were having hymn sings and picnics and birthday parties and anything and everything we could do to keep us together as a family and make sure we had that family spirit going on. And totally forgot about there was a lost world out there that we needed to be reaching for Christ. I remember coming into our team meeting and in with the deacons and saying, guys, I just want to ask your forgiveness. I said, we've been working so hard at inward that we've forgotten about outward. Yeah, that was where we were at. Fear, loss of control became very legalistic. I mean, if you were going to serve in our church, you had to be in Sunday school, church, evening church, prayer meeting. And you couldn't serve in any capacity unless you were in all of those. That was just, and there was a lot of other things like no facial hair. Whew, finally got rid of that. You know, but seriously, no facial hair. Hair over the ears, no hair over the ears. Certainly no contemporary instruments because that was godlessness then. Yeah, we became very legalistic. I had people come 10 years later as we began to move toward the Metacell and as we moved toward pastoral team that came and confessed to us. They had visited many years earlier but would never have considered coming. We were just so rigid and legalistic. And we were. And legalism will kill a spirit of joy and enthusiasm in the church. Business meetings became extremely long. What used to be one Wednesday evening became two. We weren't practicing open forums at that point. Yeah, it was extremely long and in many cases pretty ugly. And then the last, there was intense pressure to conform, putting out carbon copies of what a Christian was. Well, there's the multiple cell. In this case, you'll see that the multiple and meta are very close akin. Here's what you have to do with this. If you're going to go to multiple cell, you need to know this, deal with the issue of, do you have a lead pastor, a head pastor, a solo pastor, or do you have a senior pastor where there's others that are really pastors? You know, you have to decide who's really the ones doing the work of ministry. Do you really see the congregation as the ministers? I remember one of the interims I went to, we were pressing this idea And one day Sam came to me and he says, "It happened, Pastor Don, it happened." "What happened?" I said, "There was a guy that just stopped outside there, and he asked, he said, I need some gas. We're on our way. I don't have enough money to get the gas. Could you point me to one of the ministers?" And Sam said, "I'm one of the ministers." And he told me he took the person down to the gas station, filled the car up with gas, gave him some money, and sent him on his way after he had talked to him a little bit. Yeah, he was so excited. And I was too. That was the first time that happened in that church so far, and they were starting to get it. And believe me, I let Sam tell his testimony about being a minister. Education process, takes place. The congregation needs to know what congregational government is, or how we're going to function. This is different in this one, and we're going to function differently. And it doesn't take a big change to talk. I go into church as total congregational rule, and I say, we're not going to function like that anymore. You're going to have open forums. You're going to have a chance to pray, and then you can cast your vote. They don't mind that. They have a chance to talk about it. They have a chance to interact about it. They know they're going to pray about it. It's just amazing. It's not like you need a constitutional change to make it happen. A need for a clear understanding of your vision and values will be necessary. And then, of course, you're going to have to address the area of a fear of multiple congregations. Because in reality, that's probably going to happen. We went to 2 congregations, then 3, and has all kinds of other issues with it. But, is it really the same church if you have 2 services? Some of you have 2 services probably, right? And how about 3 services? How about if you have a service 2 miles down the road? This is before video stuff. So I preach here, then I preach there, then I preach here, and different times, and back and forth. But, hey, God's at work. And then multiple cells. You just need to learn how to develop small group ministries that really are being effective. Now, the meta-cell, in this particular case, you have to be able to make the distinction between senior pastor and pastoral team leader. And where does that distinction take place most? In the head, my head. Do I see them? Do I understand consensus? Am I willing to work alongside of the other men? And we're peers. We're accountable to each other. That's a trick, guys. That's you deciding to function differently as a pastoral team leader. And this model will never work until we can lay that area of control or whatever it might be aside. But mostly it's just I need to think differently because I never thought that that's the way it should function. There's confusion over the labor again, so whose job is it to do the work of ministry? Do you really think that if you were to go home today and say, we're going to have women baptizing from now on when they disciple, that it'll just be free-flowing and totally accepted? Some of you probably can do that. I don't know. Can you do that? Never mind. I just wondered, you got Larry, you have a baptismal tank over here, right? Yeah, we could roll it out and see how it goes tomorrow. Yeah, get some, yeah. Go out there, get somebody saved, bring them in. Yeah, so much for that. Educational process about whose job it is to do ministry, and then congregational rule again, as opposed to congregational government. Need for a clear understanding of vision and values, but there's one other thing here. The fear of multiple congregations needs to be addressed, because I'm telling you, what can we do? How many of you have practiced communion in your small group ministries? Meaning, well, this week, instead of doing communion Sunday morning, all of our small groups are going to do communion. Could you do that? I'm smiling, but could you do that? Do you violate something if you did that? Is there a biblical construct that you can't have people of your congregation doing communion in their home? We had a congregational meeting. We discussed that as a church. They said, look, we believe it. And you know how that happened is that what we did is we found that, well, I had never thought even that would be legal or righteous until we started having a third service 2 miles down the road. So what's the difference? If it's 2 miles down the road, we had communion down there, and here we're having communion, and why not in 19 different homes? But I'm just saying, think about the F's that we looked at earlier. Sometimes we just don't even think about the possibility. But I'll tell you, those home communion services were awesome. They really were. Where the people were turning to someone and holding a piece of bread and saying, well, this represents the body of Christ. And then someone else would take it and offer it to another person there in the room, and they would interact with that. Why did we think that only pastors could do that? Or deacons could do that? Anyway, it's time to have lunch. And you got me thinking about bread, so okay. Well, yes. Should we ask the blessing on food, or how should we go about this? Hey, Larry, there's the man.